Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bitcoin Way podcast. I'm your host, Michael Jordan, and I appreciate you being here. I just wrapped up a fantastic conversation with Nico Moran, who is CEO and founder of Bitvolt and host of Simply Bitcoin. Simply Bitcoin, if you're not familiar, is an incredible YouTube channel, social media presence. These guys do all sorts of content. If you are particularly new or earlier to Bitcoin, I think that it's a great combination of education and entertainment. I'd highly encourage you to check it out. I enjoyed this conversation with Nico, and I think you will too. Alrighty, everyone. Like I said in the intro, I've got Nico here with me today. Nico, welcome to the Bitcoin Way podcast.
Yo, what's up, man? Happy to be here. Saw that you guys started a podcast, which is really exciting. There could never be too many Bitcoin podcasts because we got to get the orange signal out there. So happy to be here, man.
I love the attitude. Love what you're doing too in the space. And I think that's where I'd like to start with you is tell me about Simply Bitcoin. Start with maybe back a little bit, how you got into Bitcoin and how you went from learning about Bitcoin for the very first time to now creating daily content on the subject.
Yeah, so my orange pill journey started in 2016. I was working a minimum wage job, really hated my life. And I saw the whole industry kind of as an opportunity. So I had a cousin of mine at the time who was living in Venezuela, and he was mining with his father, my uncle. And he came to visit me one day. I was staying at my friend's apartment, living on his couch in Brickell in downtown Miami. And I said, "What are you doing with your life?" He's like, "Well, I have these magic internet machines and they just make money." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I sold everything I had at the time, borrowed money from my mom, borrowed money from my ex-girlfriend, jumped on a plane, went to Venezuela. And at the time, the country was going through this like really interesting kind of moment in its history. I mean, it's happened before, but like basically the first innings of like hyperinflation or like crazy inflation. So there's the stock market, there's the official exchange rate, and then there's the black market rate, which is what everyone was actually paying. So the black market rate was so freaking cheap that essentially you were mining for free. There was like a period of like 1 or 2 years where you're mining for free in Venezuela. And obviously you make a fortune. But then what started to happen is that not the government themselves, but like people that worked in the government, they had positions of authority. They started to realize that like one S9 was making them more money than they would make in an entire month off a government salary, so that they would start stealing the machines so that they could mine at home themselves. It wasn't like here where it's like, oh, the border patrol, they've seized your stuff, here's your case number and blah blah blah, and this is how you make a claim. No, it would just be gone. And then it's just because they would just start taking these machines themselves. And then the government kind of started to crack down a little bit. It spooked a lot of my uncle's clients and his friends as he was hosting for them. And I was the only American citizen, so I was able to bring a lot of them back to the United States. And I worked in commercial real estate before I got into Bitcoin. And my clients would send me pictures and their properties that they would want to sell. And one of them, this older gentleman, made his fortune in the defense industry, and he had this 500,000 square foot facility. And I called him. I'm like, "Hey, what are you doing with this?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just putting my cars there," because the guy loved to collect cars apparently. And the facility had 10 megawatts of capacity. And I'm like, "Have you heard of Bitcoin mining?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "What's your cost of electricity?" Anyways, everything checked out, and I was able to move a lot of my uncle's clients that were mining with him in Venezuela. Obviously, they weren't getting as great of a deal, but it was 2017. It was still ramping up, right? And then 2018 hit. It was like back to square one. So I had to go back to like traditional fiat mining, worked in real estate a little bit, tried to mine a little bit more. Then things started to warm up again, as we were heading into the next bull market. But that's kind of like where I stumbled into media and content creation. And what I didn't know at the time was 2017 and 2020 was like the infancy of Bitcoin only media. Meaning before 2017, you would find like Bitcoin and crypto media, but Bitcoin only wasn't even a thing, right? So I was lucky enough because one of my good friends, like we were holding together during the bear market. He ended up becoming head of news at Bitcoin Magazine, and we built this like really good relationship, kind of like climbing out of the depths of whatever it was that we were in. And one of the panels got canceled last minute, and I was super super privileged and happy enough that he invited me to. And it was my first, foray into speaking at these major conferences, and it was the main stage, Bitcoin 2021, the year that like Saylor and Kaiser had his like talk. It was the year that Bukele had his thing, and there I am, first time speaking ever at main stage at a Bitcoin conference. And he was kind enough to ask me a couple questions about Simply Bitcoin, and I was able to kind of recommend it, and that gave it a little bit of a boost. And one of my theories that I said there was basically like, my theory of the case with Simply Bitcoin is to apply some of the tools and tactics that are known in the content creation sphere, but to Bitcoin only content, which has never been done before this point. And that was my theory. Fast forward a couple of years later, ended up proving right. But in the meantime, Corey and we had this like kind of like relationship, and he offered me a job. I turned him down. Then the bear market came, and I was like, "Hey, how about that job?" And then I ended up joining Swan Bitcoin, and I was with them for about a year, and I led their content strategy. So anything kind of YouTube related, and kind of starting off their Twitter strategy as well, their news aggregator. And that was a great experience, kind of like in the corporate world. Kind of built the machine for them, the media machine. And then fast forward, back to being independent. The bull market's starting. Simply's growing. We have a group of 12 people part time. We have a group of, I think it's 3 or 4 of us that are full time. So yeah, I mean, it's been a long and tumultuous journey through Bitcoin, but it's been super super worth it. It's my 8th year, bro. It's freaking crazy. Time just flies. So this is a little bit of my background into Bitcoin and my career and all that.
That's awesome. Very cool. I didn't know the background in mining. I obviously knew you were at Swan for a little while. How do you think about your audience today at Simply versus your time at Swan, who maybe is a little more, they've got retail, but maybe a little more institutional, in sort of their approach. Does your message change? Obviously, the style I think is unique into itself. But can you talk a little bit about
No,
that?
I mean, I think engagement is king. I think engagement is king. I think, you know, like views talk. So the internet has done something very interesting, which is like it's democratized the content creation kind of field. So what do I mean by that? I mean that like you don't need a large kind of legacy institution backing you up. Like what you need is like, are you getting views? Or are you not getting views? Like it just comes down to that. Like
Hmm.
if you're not getting views, your content sucks. If you're getting views, your content's doing well. So that was always kind of like my guiding principle. At Swan, obviously, because it was a financial services company, there were some constraints. But to give Corey credit, he did kind of give me the like do what you got to do, Nico. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like do like just do whatever it takes to get engagement, to get views, to get traction. Obviously, stay away from like the things that Bitcoiners don't appreciate, which is price speculation. So I stay away from that completely. Um,
Hmm.
any things that are, let's say, like that could maliciously hurt the person that you're speaking to. So we're huge advocates of self custody. We're huge advocates of dollar cost averaging, of not trading. If we do mention any type of price prediction, it's never us making that prediction. It's always like a, Adam Back or Max Kaiser, or someone highly reputable or esteemed in the industry. And we're like, look, this is what he made this price prediction. This is why we believe it could be true. This is why I believe it can't be true. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's just approach it. I approached it when I was at my time at Swan. Always been my approach at Simply is like maximize for views, maximize for the amount of engagement, which I think will have the biggest impact. Right, the more views you get, the more people are watching your content. You obviously want people watching Bitcoin content or versus non-Bitcoin content.
Right. So I came to Bitcoin in 2022. So I'm a relatively newer Bitcoiner. Still figuring out exactly the cadence of your show. So you've got like a daily YouTube show, and then it seems like maybe there's some different like variations of what you do. Like what's the content that you're putting out on a regular basis?
Yeah, so we have we release like 14 vertical videos a week. We have a live show 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and then really release original content 3 to 4 times a week. On top of
Okay.
kind of our news aggregator on Twitter. But that's the
Okay.
whole kind of content schedule. We release a lot of content. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks like it. And your audience, I imagine, is predominantly either Bitcoin maximalists or early Bitcoiners. Less geared, it would seem a little bit less geared to like total newbies or people who haven't dipped their toes into the Bitcoin space yet. Like you're trying to promote self custody Bitcoin principles to people who have already begun to see the light. It seems. Would that be accurate, or do you think do you see yourself bringing on new like increasing
So
adoption
you're
rates?
asking me basically where we are in the funnel.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would say we're near top funnel. We aren't quite top funnel.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most difficult things to do is break the Bitcoin echo chamber. So how do I get non Bitcoin people to listen to my content? Right, like that's the
Mm-hmm.
difficult part, right? Um, and the way that you do that is by getting people to ask a very important question, which is what is money? So any type of content, however which way we approach it, just boils down to getting people's foot in the door. And then once someone's foot is in the door, we really just want them to ask a very, very basic question, which is what is money? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, of course, you're running a media company at the same time. You have people that depend on you. So there's like a business aspect of it as well, which is um you want to make your partners happy, right? Because and the only way they're going to be happy is if people are watching your content in the first place, and then by watching your content they're going to sit through an ad of one of our partners, and we pick our partners very, very carefully so that it aligns with who we are as Simply Bitcoin. So it's two things you kind of have to juggle at the same time. It's a little rough, but we wouldn't be here without our audience, and we wouldn't be here without our partners. They're literally what keep the lights on, at Simply Bitcoin, right? So name it off the top of my head, right? We have our lead sponsor, the Bitcoin Way is awesome. Foundation Devices, Kaboom Racks, Brian DeMint's new book, Bitcoin Evangelism, Planting the Seeds for the Decentralized Revolution. So yeah, I mean, just to kind of name a few, we wouldn't be here without them. So, we're very, very happy with our partners.
Yeah. So one of the things I've noticed listening to your content is like I view you as one of the more compelling personalities in Bitcoin because I feel like you strike this balance between like you give sort of the authentic like YouTuber experience, like the energy and like and I'm sure there's just like this nuanced stuff that that you're doing intentionally, and most people aren't picking up on exactly what it is, but it makes it like it creates like an entertaining environment. But when it like when things slow down, then in between the cuts and in that it's like dense content, not dense like to your point, maybe more top of the funnel, but very thoughtful content. I'm curious, do you think about how you strike that balance when you're reaching your audience, or is that just sort of an intuitive thing that comes to you? You've got the energy, but you also think long and deeply about Bitcoin.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think authenticity is a superpower on the internet. It's like one of the things that if you portray accurately, it really establishes trust with your audience, and they actually like to watch you, right? So authenticity is key. How are you authentic? Be real, right? Like, some people like to cover, which is like coming honestly from the coattails of legacy media, where you try to cover up all the imperfections versus we just show you the imperfections on air. Like one of the things, English is my second language, so sometimes I can't read certain words on screen, and I'll tell like Opti, I can't read that word. Can you read it on screen? And when people see that, like your initial reaction is like, these guys are morons. And but the actual reaction that you're going to get from people is these guys actually mean what the fuck, and we do, right? It's like these guys are just like human beings like the rest of us, and they just bought cameras and got microphones and literally taught themselves how to build a media company out of nothing. Holy shit, I really fuck with these guys. So yeah, it's and then of course if you do a show for 3 years straight of your life, repetition, you become an expert through repetition, right? So, to answer your original question, is there nuances or there tools and tactics that you kind of use? Absolutely. But you only really kind of learn those through trial and error, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. And then most important, like, and I tell this to everybody, is just be authentic, be yourself. Like, don't try to be someone you're not. Just be the person that you are, even if it means I don't know something at this moment in my life, like I'm not an expert in this field. You will achieve a lot more success that way than trying to perceive yourself as an expert. And I'll throw this question back to you. Who are some of the most popular broadcasters on the face of the planet, including the most popular Bitcoin broadcaster? Do you have McCormack? You have Joe Rogan? You have Tucker Carlson. It's some of the most watched people on the face of the planet. None of them are experts. None of them are, like these very like kind of sophisticated high level. Doesn't mean that they can't engage in a conversation of those types of intellectual conversation. Doesn't mean that, but they portray themselves as the average everyday individual, which means that a lot of people find them relatable, right? Versus someone who like could technically, you could say that they're like the high intellectual types, and there's nothing bad with that. But is that something that you can watch every day? That's the question for you, right? Is that something could you watch every day, or would you rather want somebody that like, of course, it's personal preference, but a Joe Rogan who's like, this dude's just chilling on his podcast, ordering pizza, wearing a wig, talking to Elon Musk because, that's fun, right? You can listen to that every day. I don't think you can listen to something that comes off too much as a college lecture, right? So we really try to take a lighthearted, authentic approach, and there's no all size fits all. You kind of have to see where you are as a content creator and play to your strengths and kind of stay away from your weaknesses.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be working for you, for sure. So one of the things that I like, you talk about this, and I want to hear you elaborate. So you talk a lot about Bitcoin as a peaceful revolution. I think most people today, like I just think about friends and family. Like I have very few people in my life who have swallowed the orange pill. And most of them view Bitcoin as an asset class, something they could allocate a bit of money to, and hopefully the number goes up. And I think that's like, to a lot of people, the appeal of the ETF is or the ETFs is it doesn't have to, they don't have to think about it, but they can get the potential upside in dollar terms. How do you view the peaceful revolution? Like, how do you define that? And what's the delta in your understanding of Bitcoin as a peaceful revolution versus what the average Joe or Jane thinks about Bitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, the revolution is the separation of money and state. And I think it's going to radically redefine and impact how the state and the individual see each other and interact with each other. I really believe in the theory from the sovereign individual that, this idea of this giant all powerful nanny welfare state. And I believe that system itself is dying. And it's dying a slow death, and it's dying that everyone knows the nation state model is dead, but they still go out on TV and they clown world the shit out of it. And you're just like, I can't believe the president of the United States is saying stuff like this. Like, I can't believe, the head of the European Central Bank is saying these like ludicrous, what do you mean I'll own nothing and be happy? What type of bullshit is that? Right. And you're looking at this and you're like, this is crazy, right? So what I think is happening is you're seeing this model, this system that was constructed in order to beat the Axis powers in the 1940s, and they built up this what Eisenhower called the military industrial complex, right? This giant behemoth of an apparatus that supposedly was to protect, the US from its enemies. And now all of a sudden that apparatus is coming and it's actually attacking the very people that it was supposed to serve. But you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what is and Ron Paul has like the best quote, right? Which is like, it's not a coincidence that the century of central banking is also the bloodiest century, in human history. So what is like the creation, like what is the cause of this like absolute Frankenstein creature, the administrative state? Some people call it the deep state, right? This is happening all over the world, right? What is funding all of this? Why did Javier Milei get elected in Argentina and his campaign is literally taking a chainsaw and chainsawing the central bank? Well, it's fiat money. Yeah. It's obviously fiat money. It's like literally the cause of all these problems. So what I believe is happening right now is the disintermediation of information and the disintermediation of money, and it's happening at the same time. The state is losing its ability to control the narrative through a handful of legacy media institutions, right? This is why they hate social media. This is why they're saying that's misinformation, that's hate speech, that's this, because they can no longer control what people are thinking on a mass scale. If people like you and I right now, what we're doing is we're communicating peer to peer. This is going to be broadcasted out to an audience. Did we have to speak to someone? Was there a boss that we needed to speak to? Are there certain things that we can't cover? You get what I'm trying to tell you. Now, imagine this on a massive scale. So that's the disintermediation of information. Now, what is happening at the same time is the disintermediation of money, right? So all of a sudden, as an individual, not only do you have the power to choose what information you want to consume, you now have the power to choose what money you want to use, right? And if you're a government, and this is what the revolution boils down to, if you're a government and you've been used to a power of being able to control your populace, back in the early 2000s, they convinced the American public that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction due to a New York Times article. Okay. Mm-hmm. A couple weeks ago, they used the Wall Street Journal to claim that Bitcoin was being used to launder money for terrorists and Hamas. It took Twitter or the Bitcoin community to debunk that within a day. And then that led to congressional testimony where Tom Emmer literally made the head of the FinCEN admit that that article was BS. That was never possible before social media. That wasn't possible. It was not possible, right? And the whole money aspect, which is just happening right now, that wasn't possible either. So what is the peaceful Bitcoin revolution? It's individuals claiming back their sovereignty. Either it's like, yes, I'm going to make my own choices. I'm going to do my own research. I'm going to come to my own conclusions. You don't get to decide what is misinformation, what is the true information, because you've abused that privilege. I get to make that decision. And number two, I get to pick and choose what money I want to use. And here's the thing. If governments didn't abuse their power of being the issuers of money, I don't think Bitcoin would exist. But it's literally baked into the Genesis block. It says Chancellor on the brink of the second big bailout for banks. Satoshi knew that they were going to keep out bailing the banks at the cost of Main Street. And this is why we're here. So what is the revolution? The revolution only requires one thing, if you do this anyways, if you're actively buying Bitcoin, earning Bitcoin, mining Bitcoin, and taking that Bitcoin into self-custody, you're part of the revolution, whether you realize it or not, because what you're doing is that you're taking your work, your energy, your time, you're taking it out of their system, which needs you, and you're putting it into a system where it's protected by this orange force field that doesn't allow people to steal time from you. It doesn't allow a government, a president, a corporation to debase your wealth, to debase your currency. That is the revolution. And before, that wasn't possible. If, let's say I was a wealthy dentist, right? Or let's say I was a wealthy individual, I would be forced to invest, basically outsource that to a wealth management bank. I would be forced to be a part-time investor just to maintain my purchasing power. What Bitcoin is saying is like, no, 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 no. All you got to do is just save your money, properly secure it, and you're golden. Like all those things that you needed to jump through, like you don't need to do that anymore. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, right? So that's the revolution. And our job as Bitcoiners is to wake people up to the fact that it's not left versus right, right? Which is how you would traditionally define it, right? It's not the left that's doing these things to you. It's not the right. It's really the money. And if you fix the money, a lot of those economic woes that a lot of people are feeling, but continue to seek a political solution to, literally disappear as soon as you transition to a Bitcoin standard. It might take a cycle, might take you 3 or 4 years for you to be like, okay, this was a good idea, but it's there. It's there and it's real. Your life, I guarantee you, will improve if you transition to a Bitcoin standard. Everything gets cheaper. You have hope for the future. You have opportunity. You have prosperity. You have hope. You have optimism. You have all those things. And really what's on the other side is the party of green, which are the people that are actively advocating for the system, which is a system of nihilism, war, poverty, disparity, and slavery, which is fiat on central bank digital currencies. So that's the revolution. It's Team Orange versus Team Green. What side are you on? The more time progresses, there is literally only 2 options, and people got to choose which side they're on. 99.9999% will choose Team Orange. It's just a matter of education.
This episode of the Bitcoin Way podcast is sponsored by us, your friends at the Bitcoin Way. If you rely on a third-party or closed-source hardware wallet for your Bitcoin custody, you are compromising on how you store your wealth. The Bitcoin Way offers white glove service to help you take full self-custody of your Bitcoin and sleep in peace knowing you've done it right. Like most Bitcoiners, we believe that your Bitcoin stack will one day be worth a lot more than it is today. Go to thebitcoinway.com to sign up for a free consultation with a member of our team. Don't delay on protecting your wealth and reach out today. So I completely agree with you and love that rant. So pull out your crystal ball for a minute. What do you think is so I agree it's a matter of education. My sense is it's also a matter of sort of an intolerable amount of pain too, because my sense is that you and I have less patience for government tyranny than the average person. And I sense that because there are so many people in my life who love and trust me, but know I'm interested in Bitcoin and have never expressed interest in learning about it. And so they continue to play sort of the game that's always been played. What do you think it is that sort of turbocharges the Bitcoin, the peaceful revolution? Is it a hyperinflationary event? Is it I just can no longer afford my basic necessities? Like, especially in the West, where we are more fortunate to have a relatively stronger currency than much of the world. What do you think it is that gets us from 1% adoption or whatever we're at to like your grandma is involved in this and all of her friends, and it's just like it's this network effect sort of takes hold.
So I mean, I've been Bitcoin content for the longest time. And I can tell you that the biggest converter is number go up. And but it's steps, right? So you have that one annoying friend who's a psychopath that's like in 2016, 2017, like, yo, it's Bitcoin thing. It's a good idea. And they just don't listen. And then it's 2020 or 2024 when he told you the shit was at like $500, $600, and now it's sitting pretty at $72,000, dude, you fucking listen that next time. Yeah. And that hasn't failed me one time, right? The only like established, entrenched friend of mine from childhood that has not listened to me yet is a VP at Goldman here in Miami, who again benefits tremendously from the current fiat system. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he's one of the latest to. But again, he will capitulate. It's inevitable because of BlackRock, right? So
Yeah.
Bitcoin is won. It's over. This is a done. Look, the moment that Saylor became vindicated on a public company level, the moment El Salvador became vindicated, the moment you have the largest asset manager in the world and their CEO, and he's literally going on the legacy financial media and literally saying like all the talking points that we've said at Simply Bitcoin for years, and he's literally saying them, we already won the game. It's just a matter of like, where do you want to enter? Do you want to enter at, 0.072 million, or do you want to enter at 0.5 million? Like that's the question that I have for everyone. Like what time, like, do you want to pay the barrier? Do you want to pay the cost entry now, or do you want to pay it later? Because Bitcoin really, it's not an IQ test. Bitcoin is a humility test. And it's a very, very tough pill to swallow because essentially you have to humble yourself enough to realize that you just weren't like, you just didn't want to buy it at 10K. There's consequences to that. Like, and yes, a lot of people got in earlier than you did. Right. And I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about just people in general. Like, this is how you, the way to look at it. Like, I beat myself up. I wish I had more Bitcoin. Trust me, every single person wishes they had more Bitcoin. But you know what the one thing in common that they all have is that everyone feels like they're late. I felt like I was like holy, it's over. It's done. Right? Like, what do you mean $500-600 Bitcoin? Like, people are buying this at pennies. It's done and dusted for me. And now I'm like, oh, okay, like, all right, maybe I wasn't super, super early, but like, I think I was pretty early. And then here's the thing. Right now we're sitting at 0.071 million. When this thing's at 2 million, you're going to beat yourself up for not wanting to buy it at 71,000. Like, it's just like, I could tell you that for a fact, right? So this thing's going up forever. It's infinity divided by 21 million. If you move to a Bitcoin standard, your life will get cheaper. So how everyone says there's a housing crisis. If you're on a fiat standard, if you're on a Bitcoin standard, literally you could look priced in Bitcoin. Housing has gotten 90% cheaper over the last 5 years if you've been saving in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So again, like, there's no excuse as to why someone hasn't made the transition yet. If they want to take an ideological stance against it and they want to just take it whatever, like, they can have fun staying poor. That's my take on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And my thing recently has been, the expression "fortune favors the bold." I think with Bitcoin too, I completely agree with you. Humility, because I kicked myself that I actually bought my first Bitcoin. I think back in 2018. I bought a bunch of other things that didn't end up being worth it, but I think I sold it at a profit at some point and thought like that was the game. I was like, I didn't know anything about the fundamentals of Bitcoin, right? And so anyway, I think where my journey changed was when I got curious about it. And so I think fortune does favor the bold at times. I think with Bitcoin, it also favors the curious in addition to the humble, which you're completely correct about. So part of the challenge, I think, for a lot of people, and I hope that your channel is bringing this level of sort of entertainment to the space that draws new people in over time, is, like, it makes it more engaging, because if the only options are long form podcasts and dense macroeconomic analysis and what's wrong, I think that's where the challenge is for a lot of people. That's like the sticking point. So that's just been my observation. I've still got a good handful of people I need to orange pill in my life. They haven't, and it's not all Goldman Sachs VPs either. It's everyday folks who I think just haven't reached the level of curiosity to say, I'm going to invest time to figure this out a bit.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, like the reality is, that's why I said, like, congratulations that you guys are starting a podcast, because we can never have too many podcasts. Why? Because everyone is going to be approaching this from a different angle, right? On where you are. Some people need, for example, the Breedlove Sailor series is incredible, right? Natalie, professionally trained, was, pleasure working with her. Like, she's a professionally trained, she's really good at what she does, right? Peter, incredible production. Like, you have no idea how difficult it is for him to set up, that type of set every single time he does an in-person interview, flying and all that stuff. The logistics behind that is absolutely gnarly. But you'll notice one common theme is that we're all approaching this from a very different perspective and different angle, which means that we're going to connect with people differently in a different way. Some people are going to want to consume Peter McCormack. Some people are going to want to consume Breedlove. Some people are going to want to consume BTC sessions because they want to learn something. Some people are going to want to consume Simply Bitcoin because they're into that form of infotainment, right? So it really kind of like Breitbart had this amazing quote, which is politics is downstream from culture. So what does that entail? That entails that if you want to win the political game, you got to win over the culture game, right? So essentially what I'm trying to say is that Bitcoin culture has to go mainstream. And if this thing goes mainstream, we win by default. Like, it's over. It's game, set, and match. We don't even have to deal with crazy people like Elizabeth Warren, right? You don't have to deal with them because their like rhetoric and their arguments are going to be so outside of the Overton window. It's outside of the acceptable window of discourse that just people are going to be ashamed them. And here's the thing, like, we have every tool in our shed for Bitcoin content to be mainstream because what we're saying and what we're advocating for isn't insane. It isn't crazy. We don't have to lie. We're just basically saying, like, hey guys, money doesn't have to steal from you in order to function. And by the way, not only does it like not need to lose purchasing power over time, it could actually increase in purchasing power over time. Actually, it's designed to do that. Actually, also, censorship resistant. Yeah, you could do that. Also, it's very easy to transport, through an airport or something. You just got to write down 12 to 24 words. And it's like, but if you've spent the majority, have you ever seen the movie The Matrix? Of course you have. You're a Bitcoiner. Okay. Yeah. All right. So do you know the scene where Morpheus and Neo were like talking, and then like Morpheus shows Neo the Matrix for the first time, but it's a construct. And then he's like, you see, Neo, you're nothing more but a battery. And Neo's like, no, that's not, no way. That's a lie. That's whatever. And he freaks out, and like, and then they take him out of the construct, and he freaks out. He throws up. He's like, oh, he's going to pop, and he pops. The next scene, Morpheus is like leaning over Neo. Neo's like waking up, and he looks at Morpheus like, it's all real, isn't it? And Morpheus is like, yeah. And then Morpheus is like, I apologize, Neo. After a certain age, we don't wake people up from the Matrix because it's too much for them to handle. Okay. All that being said, you have to understand that, especially if you're a little bit older. Now, I've met some awesome Bitcoin boomers, my parents included, right? Some of the most influential people in the space. But if you spent the majority of your life in the fiat matrix with the convenience of banking, right? The convenience of someone else having the responsibility of taking custody of your wealth without being aware of what the downsides of that are, right? Because we have the privilege of living in a country with a relatively stable financial system. What they don't tell you is that it's not 10% reserve banking anymore. It's like 0% reserve banking. Like, it's something crazy like that, right? Like like that money in your account, it's not really there, right? But of course, like, nothing has really broken for people to kind of wake up to that reality. So essentially, it's really about waking people up to the fiat matrix and getting them to understand that a lot of their economic and political woes are not caused by the opposing political party. What's really happening to society right now is broken money and the broken incentive structure that comes with that broken money. And the more we wake up people to that fact, not only is it going to unify society, like, I know commie Bitcoiners, good friends of mine, right? Like, I know, hardcore Christian Bitcoiners, good friends of mine too, right? We all have something in common, which is what? Bitcoin, right? So it'll bring humanity together. And I think that humanity's divided right now because fiat brings out the worst in people, versus Bitcoin bringing out the best in people?
I like that answer. So what do you tend to identify as like the biggest sticking points to someone saying yes to Bitcoin? Is it because I know, for like, I mean, at the Bitcoin way, I mean, we help people with self custody, right? And for a lot of people, there's like this technical hurdle that they perceive that they need to overcome. I'll just give you my opinion, then you can kind of use that as a jumping off point. I think even convincing people that there is a problem, exactly like that the money is broken. I think they see costs rising, but I don't know that they view that as a symptom of some underlying condition, if that makes sense. I think it's like, it's kind of your point. It's like a fish in water. It's the water's the last thing that they would tell you about in describing their environment, because it's what they know. What is it for you that you've found to be hardest as an obstacle to overcome in explaining why Bitcoin and what the challenges are with our current setup?
Yeah, I mean, self custody is a big one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, again, the Matrix example is a great, like, kind of, and also your technical know how, right? Like, but which is, it's so funny when you say that, because it's like, okay, say you're a high net worth individual, right? To deal with fucking banks, bro. Okay, so that means like going into the branch. Have you ever sent a wire, dude? That shit's like archaic as
Yeah.
fuck, and it takes forever. And and then some. It's a $30 fee. Okay, $30 whatever fee. Try sending that wire outside the country. It's like, like, what's your favorite color? What's your religion? What's your what's your wife's social security? It's like, it's crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, that idea that like somehow writing down or properly securing 12 words and on a hardware wallet, if you could send a wire, like, you could take self custody, is basically what I'm trying to say. So, but
Yeah.
again, if you've been living in the fiat matrix for most of your life, you're like, no, that's too hard, right? So that's number one. um Number two is people's lack of necessity for it, or because in if you live in the US or you live in the United Kingdom, you live in Europe, okay, even with the pandemic shenanigans of printing more money, than has ever been printed in the history of the world, right? With all those shenanigans, right? Inflation reached what, in 15, you say 1510, if you believe the inflation number is 9%, right?
Yeah.
Um, that isn't 115% inflation. I tweeted when Milei got elected in Argentina. I said, guys, we have a playbook. All we need is 150% inflation, then we'll get a libertarian elected.
That's right.
So people just don't see that necessity. But the beautiful part about this is number go up does something very special, right? And it convinces people. And we all have monkey brains, believe it or not, right? And like, when the price goes up, your monkey brain says buy, 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 buy. When the price goes down, you're like, no, we gotta sell, we gotta sell. And people are very, and look, I've been in this industry a long time, and you still see that number go up, and you're like, wow, if I had any extra cash, I would be like piling in right now, right? So, I think I'm starting to get texts here and there, but I still haven't got the text from that friend that I haven't talked to in 7 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I get that text from that friend that I haven't talked to in like 7 years, and we all have that friend, you'll know that we're in we really are in the
Yeah.
euphoria phase of the market cycle.
For
So,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, I guess last question for you. I want to kind of run down through a handful of things that are going on in the world, events and Bitcoin, and just get your take, how you think it impacts, future value of Bitcoin, how it impacts, anything Bitcoin related. And so the first one is, we've got two wars going on, and I know that one of the things we talk about in Bitcoin is, I mean, to your point, like the peaceful revolution. Part of that peaceful revolution is the fact that if you can't print money, you have to go to your populace to demand taxes to fund wars, and unpopular wars get canned really quickly in that sort of circumstance. Uh, to what extent do you think these wars impact Bitcoin, impact value? impact policy that might in some way then as a byproduct impact Bitcoin? Is that something you've thought much about?
Yeah, I think, the reality is that, look, like, they're able to send $60 billion as the next bill, right? The $60 billion to Ukraine, not because the US has that money, but because they're able to print it, and because the US is the world reserve currency. And all these other countries have to essentially facilitate international trade in US dollars, and their central banks are holding dollars. It gives the US this very unique privilege of, literally printing money out of thin air. If the world was on a Bitcoin standard, right, and no country had that privilege, uh good luck, just, hey guys, we're going to take 60 billion out of our coffers, of which you, the taxpayer, paid for, and we're going to send it to Ukraine. But here's the thing: war is very expensive. So you might get away with that one time, but then it's like, oh guys, by the way, we need more money for the war. Your income tax right now is not enough, so actually we're going to raise it like 5 to 10%, and then people be on the streets the next day and vote that maniac out of office, right? But that correction mechanism isn't there, because, okay, they just print the money, and then that it has infected other sides of society. So like when a politician goes up, is like, free college, what they're really doing is that they're taking $100 out of your back pocket, ripping that bill in half, maybe giving you $10 from the front, and be like, here you go, free college. That shit ain't free. You're paying for it. They're paying for it through monetary debasement. That's how they're paying for it. Look, the US spends more than $1 trillion. That's more than the GDP of a lot of countries. It spends more than $1 trillion every single year than it collects in tax revenue. How are they able to fund that deficit? They print the money. They literally just create it out of thin air, right? Which devalues the money of anyone who's holding dollars, essentially, right? The world hasn't woken up to that. They haven't woken up out of the fiat matrix, and they're still thinking that Donald Trump or Joe Biden is the problem. Like, we have a lot of work to do as Bitcoiners to wake up society to the fact that, guys, like, the root of all evil isn't money. The root of all evil is fiat money. Like, it's broken, it's rotten, it breaks society to the bone.
So you segued well into my next one, the presidential election. I think you and I both agree that voting harder isn't going to be the solution. But you got a few candidates now who I think actually Trump recently came out at least unopposed to Bitcoin. Not, I don't think as a proponent, but a few others throughout the campaign cycle have come forward as something approaching pro Bitcoin. Do you think that's a topic that it comes to the forefront more? I think for me, I step back and I look at most of my friends and family, and they are not thinking Bitcoin is not a ballot issue for them. I mean, they're going to vote harder for the person who they think best aligns with their values, but Bitcoin's not going to come to the surface. How do you think this plays out in a presidential election? Do you think that's something that gets talked about in debates? Does it impact turnout for any particular party? Just any sort of thoughts?
Yeah, so it's already in the political discourse. Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, RFK Jr., who was running as a Democrat but went independent, they've all made it part of their party platforms that if they were to get elected, they would protect the right to self-custody, they protect Bitcoin, and they would be anti-CBDC, anti-central bank digital currency. Donald Trump, because of Vivek, shout out Vivek, thank you Vivek, said if he were to get elected, he would take an anti-CBDC stance. In this morning's CNBC interview, he actually talked about, quote unquote, not banning Bitcoin, because obviously he knows it's popular with his base. It's already in the political discourse, my friend, and we already know what the Biden administration, what their stance on this thing is. They're pro CBDC, pro central bank. They came out with a report last year called the Presidential Economic Report. They dedicated 20 entire. Can I curse?
No,
can I curse that on this show?
Oh yeah,
20 fucking pages, bro, to making the case as to why central banks are necessary and why Bitcoin is, like, you need to have a state for a currency. So, like, they're shitting their pants. They don't like this thing. They want to make this go away. It's already it's already a hot button issue. It's already being debated. A lot of Bitcoiners won't say on Bitcoin Twitter, maybe because it's not politically correct, is that a whole lot more Republicans are pro Bitcoin, anti CBDC, and there's a whole lot more Democrats that are pro CBDC, anti Bitcoin. It's not being talked about enough. It's not black and white, right? There's Democrats that are pro Bitcoin. There's Republicans that are anti Bitcoin, but that's essentially what I'm seeing right now in the political sphere. Now, what I got to say to my liberal / progressive / Democratic friends, what I got to say to them is like, hey, you're for the little guy. You want equity and you want equality. Bitcoin is the most equitable, equal money the world has ever seen. Anyone could download a Bitcoin wallet. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle, of the Serengeti and you don't have an ID and you can't afford it and you don't have the opportunity than someone that was born in the West. Bitcoin gives you the ability to, have your own bank and transact with the rest of the world, right? So you would think that, and of course, if you're on the right, it protects, it protects your ability to store unconfiscatable wealth. It protects your ability to save yourself from taxes, but it supports both, discussions from both sides of the aisle. But what I'm looking at right now is, for some reason, more people on the Democratic Party in the US are anti-Bitcoin. Like there's 17 or 18% or 17 or 18 senators that are actively supporting the Elizabeth Warren bill. That would be a de facto kill Bitcoin bill in the United States. That's like half of every Democratic senator. Why are you guys supporting that? I doubt their constituents would be okay with that, right? Mm-hmm. So what's going on there? I don't know, but I really think it just boils down to protecting their privilege of being able to create money for free that another human being has to work for. That's all. Honestly, I think that's what it boils down to. Anyone who is pro CBDC, anti Bitcoin, you benefit from the existing system and you want to maintain that benefit.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a privilege to have. So you can kind of appreciate where they're coming from, I suppose. Bitcoin ETFs obviously have been a huge buyer of Bitcoin the last couple of months. Just general thoughts. I know you're a big self-custody proponent, but thoughts on the impact of ETFs, and is there a use case for certain people or institutions that they do make sense?
Yeah, I got about 3 minutes, so I'll hit the ETF. Okay, so yes, so never in Bitcoin's history has Bitcoin hit an all-time high before the halving, and never in Bitcoin's history did we go below the previous all-time high, right? So we are in uncharted territory. Part of the reason that I believe we're in uncharted territory is the amount of inflows going into Bitcoin versus the amount of outflows. The reality is, right, there's 900 Bitcoin mined every single day. There's a lot more demand in terms of purchasers than there is sellers. And then the halving is coming up literally in less than a month, or about a month. And now there's going to be that sell pressure is literally going to get cut in half. What do you think is going to happen, right? And Wall Street is just tasting what absolute scarcity is like. They've never tasted an asset like this. Gold, you could say, is something similar. Bitcoin completely obliterates gold. Look, when the price of gold goes up, the production of gold goes up with it. When the price of Bitcoin goes up, the Bitcoin production stays. Not only does it stay the same, it actually gets cut in half, right? Just to kind of give you an idea between the scarcity difference between the two. Bitcoin is absolute scarcity. Gold, you could say, is scarce, right? But it's not absolutely scarce, which is night and day difference, right? So the ETFs are a game changer because it creates the financial mechanism of which a lot of these financial institutions, a lot of old money, a lot of the wealthier, older generation, like the boomer generation, who has the lion's share of the world's wealth, now they have a mechanism to get exposure to the best asset that has ever been created in the history of mankind, right? So it is a big game changer, but it could be potentially dangerous on the revolutionary front because people might get comfortable buying an ETF, getting that number go up exposure, but at the same time, not benefiting from unconfiscatable money, which you can only achieve if you take self-custody.
I love it. And you touched on my last question, which was the halving. So perfect. Nico, hey, thank you for your time. Why don't you give us a send off? Tell people where to find you, Twitter, online, anywhere.
Yeah, guys, you can find me at Bitvolt on Twitter. Subscribe to Simply Bitcoin. You can find us basically everywhere. Just type in Simply Bitcoin. Daily live show Monday through Friday. And we have a interview series on Wednesdays. You can find it there. And Bitcoiner slavery, take self-custody. The Bitcoin way. Those guys will show you how to do it. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really appreciate it, Michael.
Appreciate it, Nico. Thanks for your time, man. Take care. And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. As I said at the beginning, Nico is an awesome guy, a wealth of knowledge, such a great resource in the Bitcoin space. You can find him at Simply Bitcoin. They are all over the place. If you're on social media, if you're looking for that sort of content, I'd encourage you to check it out. As for me, you can find me on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, at the other M Jordan. Give us a follow at The Bitcoin Way. It's at The Bitcoin Way _ and thebitcoinway.com. You can go there. If you enjoyed this interview, this conversation, please like, subscribe, share this with someone. Just trying to spread the word and get to as many people and deliver the orange pill as possible. Thank you again for being here. Until next time, this is Michael Jordan signing off.